The dust of FOB Erebus tasted of rust and forgotten things. It settled on everything. A fine red powder that worked its way into rifle mechanisms, sealed food packets, and the deep-worn lines around a soldier's eyes. For Chief Warrant Officer Anya Sharma, it was just another flavor of desolation, no different from the talcum-fine sand of the Rub al-Khali or the volcanic grit of some forgotten peak in the Hindu Kush. She stood by the chain-link fence, watching the heat shimmer rise from the packed earth of the motor pool, her small frame swallowed by ill-fitting fatigues. She was a ghost here, a logistics analyst sent to audit the forward supply chain, and she was treated as such, an invisible, inconvenient piece of administrative baggage. The dismissal was not overt at first. It was in the way soldiers from the 107th Infantry Battalion, the Ravagers, would cut in front of her in the chow line, the way their conversations would halt when she entered the comms tent, resuming only when she had passed. She was a fixture like a generator or a water tower, necessary but ignored. Her silence didn't help. She spoke only when required, her voice low and even, devoid of the bravado and black humor that served as currency in this place. They saw a paper pusher, a woman in her late 30s with a quiet face, strands of gray already threading through her dark hair, and hands that looked too clean for this environment. The open hostility began with Sergeant Rex Thorne. He was the platonic ideal of a line infantryman, thick-necked, a jaw perpetually clenched around a wad of tobacco, and eyes that held a mix of weary competence and profound arrogance. He and his squad, Corporal Diaz, a wiry man with nervous energy, and Private Chen, a kid barely out of his teens trying too hard to be one of the guys, saw Sharma as an affront. "Look at her," Thorne would mutter, loud enough for her to hear as she catalogued fuel drum serial numbers on a datapad. "Just standing there. What do they even do? Count bullets so we can use them." Diaz would snicker. "Hey, Chief, you need help lifting that heavy pen?" Sharma never reacted. She would simply make a note on her pad, her focus absolute, as if their words were nothing more than the buzz of a fly. This infuriating placidity only goaded them further. They saw it as weakness, the passivity of someone who had never faced real pressure, never heard a round snap past her ear. The pressure point arrived in the third week. Colonel Madsen, the FOB commander, called an emergency briefing in the Plywood and Sandbag Tactical Operations Center. He was a man carved from granite and impatience, with a voice that sounded like grinding gravel. A high-value convoy, codenamed Serpent's Tail, was being rerouted through their sector. It carried experimental electronic warfare components vital for a coming offensive. "This is a high-risk, high-reward run," Madsen barked, stabbing a finger at a digital map projected onto a dusty screen. "The route takes us through the Vulture's Gulch, a notorious ambush alley. Intel says local insurgents have been quiet, but I don't trust it. Thorne, your squad has the lead vehicle. I want eyes on every rock and shadow." Thorne nodded, his expression grimly self-important. "We'll clear the way, sir." Madsen's gaze swept the room, then landed on Sharma, who stood silently in the back, observing. His eyes narrowed. "And what are you doing here, Chief? This isn't a spreadsheet." Before she could answer, the FOB's logistics officer, a harried-looking captain, spoke up. "Sir, regulations for cargo of this classification require a logistics officer to physically sign off on the chain of custody at the destination. Chief Sharma is the only one here with the clearance." Madsen scowled, the lines on his forehead deepening. "So I have to drag a glorified accountant through Vulture's Gulch? Fantastic. Just stay out of the way, Sharma. Find a corner in the back of a truck and try not to get yourself killed. We don't have time to babysit." The dismissal was a physical force, pressing in on her from all sides. Thorne's squad smirked. This was the confirmation they needed. She was useless, a liability. The confrontation happened an hour later. Sharma was in the small, makeshift women's changing room, a partitioned corner of a storage container that smelled of mildew and gun oil, swapping her standard-issue blouse for a more functional combat shirt. She moved with quiet economy, her motions fluid and practiced. The door slammed open, banging against the metal wall. Thorne stood there, flanked by Diaz and Chun. They blocked the only exit. "Heard you're coming along for the ride, Chief," Thorne sneered, spitting a stream of brown juice just beside her boots. Sharma finished buttoning her shirt, her eyes never leaving his. She said nothing. "Don't you get it?" Thorne took a step closer, his bulk filling the small space. "We don't want you here. You're dead weight. People like you come out to these places to check a box, to get a promotion. But when things go sideways, you're the one who gets good men killed. We hate you," Chin blurted out, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and youthful conviction. He looked to Thorne for approval. "He's right," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a low growl. He was close enough now that she could smell the sour scent of sweat and caffeine on him. "This isn't an office. This is real life. You don't belong." He jabbed a thick finger into her shoulder. A hard, deliberate shove meant to intimidate. "You should have stayed on your plane." Diaz shifted his weight, his hand clenching into a fist. "Maybe we should make sure she understands." He took a menacing step forward. Sharma didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held their gaze, her own eyes dark and unreadable. There was a stillness about her, a profound calm that was more unsettling than any threat. It was the calm of a deep ocean, hiding unimaginable pressure beneath. She absorbed the shove as if it were a raindrop. Her posture didn't change. Her breathing didn't quicken. She looked from Thorne's furious face to Diaz's clenched fist, then to Chen's nervous bravado. She saw not soldiers, but frightened men trying to enforce a world order they understood. A world where strength was loud and visible. "Get out of my way, Sergeant," she said. Her voice was flat, without anger or fear. It was a simple statement of fact. The absolute lack of reaction infuriated Thorne. He had expected tears, anger, a complaint to the colonel, something he could use. This nothingness was an insult. He drew back his arm, his knuckles white, his intent clear. He was going to put his fist through the wall right next to her head. Maybe clip her on the way. A show of force. But before his fist could move, the container shuddered as the first vehicle in the convoy, a heavy MRAP, fired up its engine. The deep, guttural roar was a summons. Thorne hesitated, the spell broken. The mission was starting. He let his arm drop, his face contorted in a mask of disgust. "You got lucky," he spat. "On that truck, you watch your own back. Nobody else is going to." He turned and stormed out, Diaz and Chun trailing in his wake like hyenas following a lion. Sharma stood alone in the silence, the thrum of the engine vibrating through the floor. She slowly adjusted the collar of her shirt, her expression unchanged. She picked up her helmet and plate carrier, the gear feeling like a familiar skin. They thought her silence was weakness. They mistook her calm for fear. They had no idea what was coming. And as she stepped out into the blinding, dusty sunlight, she knew that in a place like Vulture's Gulch, the truth had a way of revealing itself in fire and blood. The convoy, a short, brutish line of 4 MRAPs, rumbled out of FOB Erebus under a sky the color of bleached bone. Sharma sat in the back of the third vehicle, the command truck, wedged between a stack of Pelican cases and a silent radio operator. Colonel Madsen rode in the passenger seat up front, his jaw set, occasionally barking corrections to the driver. The air inside the armored cabin was thick with the smell of diesel fumes and nervous sweat. Through the narrow, bulletproof glass, the landscape was a monotonous panorama of ochre rock and sun-blasted earth. Sharma did not look at the scenery. Her eyes were closed, but she wasn't resting. She was walking the route in her mind, a discipline hammered into her through 1,000 imagined scenarios. She visualized the choke points, the potential deadfalls, the high ground that offered the best fields of fire. She mentally mapped every twist and turn of Vulture's Gulch as it had been displayed on the TOC map, cross-referencing it with satellite imagery she had pulled up and memorized that morning. Her mind was a cold, efficient machine processing threat vectors and contingency plans. 2 clicks to the Gulch entrance, the driver announced, his voice tight. Madsen grunted. "Thorne, you read me?" "Solid copy, Colonel." Thorne's voice crackled over the radio. Lead element is 500 meters from the aperture. All clear so far. Place looks dead. Famous last words, Matson muttered to himself. He glanced into the back, his eyes passing over Sharma as if she were a piece of equipment. You strapped in back there, Chief? Wouldn't want you to spill your coffee. Sharma didn't reply. She simply gave her harness a final tug, ensuring it was secure. The truck lurched as it began the descent into the canyon. The walls of the gulch rose up on either side, sheer cliffs of red rock that baked in the sun. The road narrowed, forcing the convoy into a single file. It was a perfect kill box. The temperature inside the MRAP seemed to climb several degrees. The radio operator wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. Sharma opened her eyes. Her focus was absolute. Her senses sharpened, filtering the rhythmic rumble of the engine, the squeal of the suspension, the low hum of the electronics. She was listening for something else. A change in the pattern, a sound that didn't belong. Thorne's voice came over the radio again, laced with a false nonchalance. Still quiet, Colonel. So quiet I can hear Chan complaining about the MREs from last night. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the truck. Matson didn't laugh. Stay sharp, Thorne. Don't get cocky. They were halfway through. The cliffs were at their highest here, casting the convoy in deep shadow. Sharma's head tilted slightly, her gaze fixed on a point high up on the eastern ridge. A flicker of movement, a glint of sunlight off something that wasn't rock. It was gone before she could be certain. Contact! The scream came from the lead vehicle's radio channel, a raw sound of pure panic. The world exploded. The IED wasn't buried in the road. It was a shaped charge, hidden in the cliff face and command detonated. It struck Thorne's lead MRAP not from below, but from the side, a molten fist of copper that punched through the armor plate like it was wet cardboard. The truck was thrown sideways, slamming into the canyon wall with a deafening shriek of tearing metal. It came to a rest, smoke and fire pouring from a gaping hole in its side. Simultaneously, the air was filled with the distinctive, terrifying whoosh of RPGs. The fourth vehicle, the rear guard, took a direct hit to its engine block. It erupted in a ball of orange flame, slewing to a halt and effectively sealing the canyon, trapping the two middle vehicles. Heavy machine gun fire opened up from both sides of the ridge. The rounds hammered against the hull of Matson's MRAP like a steel hailstorm, pinging and screeching as they sought purchase. The driver screamed as a .50 caliber round punched through the engine compartment, sending a spray of superheated fluid and shrapnel into the cabin. The truck shuddered to a violent stop. Inside, the world was chaos. The radio operator was slumped over his console, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Colonel Matson was yelling, his words lost in the cacophony, a piece of shrapnel embedded in his left shoulder. The driver was trying to restart the dead engine, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Amid the bedlam, Anya Sharma was a pool of absolute stillness. Her perception of time had shifted. The screams, the explosions, the staccato drumming of machine gun fire. It all slowed down, became a symphony of data points for her to analyze. Panic was a luxury she had unlearned long ago. Her harness was off in a single, fluid motion. She moved past the panicking driver, her hand briefly touching his shoulder. "It's dead. Get out," she said, her voice cutting through his fear. She turned to Matson. The colonel was clutching his shoulder, his face pale with shock and pain. "They're dug in. Up high," he gasped. "Classic L-shaped ambush. We're pinned." Sharma didn't waste time on platitudes. Her eyes scanned his wound. "Arterial bleed. You'll be unconscious in 3 minutes, dead in 5-inch. Without waiting for a reply, she unzipped a pouch on her vest. It wasn't standard issue. Inside, neatly arranged, were tools of a trade no logistics analyst should possess. Compressed gauze, a chest seal, a combat-grade tourniquet. She ripped open his sleeve, her movements precise and economical. She found the pressure point in his armpit and dug her thumb in hard. Matson cried out. "This is going to hurt, sir," she said, her tone utterly devoid of emotion. She cinched the tourniquet high on his bicep and twisted the windlass until the bleeding slowed to a trickle. He gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. "Stay here. Stay low." She grabbed the dead operator's rifle, an M4, and checked the magazine. Full. She slung it over her shoulder. The surviving soldiers in the back of the MRAP, a corporal and a specialist, were huddled on the floor, their eyes wide with terror. "You too," she said. Her voice was not a request. It was a command. "We're dismounting. West side. Use the vehicle for cover. Lay down suppressive fire on the south ridge. Don't waste ammo. Short, controlled bursts. Move." They stared at her, their faces blank with confusion. Who was this logistics chief giving orders? But the sheer certainty in her voice, the cold authority in her eyes, broke through their paralysis. They scrambled to obey. Sharma popped the rear hatch. The noise level quadrupled. The air tasted of cordite and hot metal. She scanned the kill zone. The first MRAP was a burning wreck. A few figures were crawling away from it, Thorn among them, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. The second vehicle was still intact, its gunner trying to traverse the 50 calories turret, but the firing arcs were blocked by the canyon walls. They were being systematically torn apart from above. She took a deep breath, held it, and then moved. She didn't run in a blind panic. She flowed from cover to cover, a gray phantom against the red rock. Her movements were unnaturally efficient, a low, gliding gait that presented the smallest possible target. Bullets stitched the dirt around her feet, but she was already gone, sliding behind a large boulder next to the crippled command vehicle. The two soldiers from her truck were there, firing wildly at the cliffs. "Controlled bursts," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to make them flinch. "You're drawing fire, not suppressing it. Chun, Diaz, get on the radio. Anyone." A voice, weak and pained, came from near the burning MRAP. "Radio's shot. Everyone's down. It's Thorn. My leg's broken." Sharma's eyes swept the ridge lines again. She ignored the volume of fire, focusing instead on its origin. Two heavy machine gun nests, one on each side, providing interlocking fields of fire. At least 4 or 5 riflemen supporting each one, and a spotter somewhere high up directing the RPGs. It was professional. Too professional for local insurgents. "Specialist," she said to the younger soldier beside her, whose nameplate read Harris. "Give me your optic." Harris fumbled with the latch on his ACOG scope. "What for?" "Give it to me." She didn't raise her voice, but the intensity in it was terrifying. He handed it over. With practiced speed, she affixed it to her own rifle. She took 3 spare magazines from his vest. "Keep their heads down," she ordered, and then she was gone again, moving low and fast toward the rear of the convoy. She found cover behind the burning husk of the 4th MRAP. The heat was immense, cooking the air. She ignored it. Using the wreck as a shield from the southern nest, she rested the rifle on a piece of twisted metal, creating a stable firing platform. She took a moment, her breathing slowing until it was barely perceptible. The chaos of the ambush faded away, replaced by the cool, clean geometry of ballistics. She brought the optic to her eye. The world resolved into a magnified circle of rock and shadow. She scanned the northern ridge, not looking for soldiers, but for anomalies. A patch of rock that was the wrong color, a shadow that didn't align with the sun, the faint shimmer of heat haze from a rifle barrel. There, a muzzle flash, almost invisible against the bright rock. 450 meters. A slight crosswind from the west. She adjusted her aim, leading the target by a hair's breadth. She didn't think. She calculated. The rifle was an extension of her will. Her finger squeezed the trigger. It was a slow, deliberate press, not a pull. The M4 bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw a puff of red mist where a head had been a second before. One down. She shifted her aim, her eyes already scanning for the next target. Another flash from a cluster of boulders to the left of the first. This one was partially obscured. A difficult shot. She exhaled slowly, her heart rate a steady, metronomic beat. Squeeze. The rifle cracked again. A helmet spun into the air. 2 down. The rhythm of the machine gun fire from that ridge faltered. They knew they were being targeted. They knew a precision shooter was in the kill zone. From near the command truck, Harris and the other soldier watched, their mouths agape. They saw the impossible. This quiet logistics officer, who they'd assumed couldn't even field strip a weapon, was engaging targets at a range and with an accuracy that was the stuff of legend. She wasn't just firing back. She was hunting. Sharma ignored them. She was in the zone, a state of heightened consciousness where the only things that existed were her weapon, and her targets. She acquired a third rifleman, this one trying to relocate. Fatal mistake. He exposed himself for less than a second. It was enough. The third shot was as precise as the first 2. The northern ridge fell silent. She didn't pause to celebrate. She immediately turned her attention to the southern ridge. This was the harder problem. The machine gun there had a better angle. It was hammering the position where Thorne and the other survivors from the lead truck were pinned down. She couldn't get a clean shot from her current position. She needed a new angle. She looked back at the command MRAP. Colonel Madsen had managed to drag himself out and was slumped against a wheel, his face ashen. He was trying to work his personal comms unit, but it was likely useless with the EW jamming that accompanied any sophisticated ambush. She needed to get to him, to the truck, to the long-range radio. "Harris, cover me," she yelled. The specialist, jolted from his stupor, began firing controlled bursts at the southern ridge. Sharma broke cover. She moved in a serpentine pattern, the dirt kicking up around her as the enemy gunner tried to track her. But she was too fast, her path too unpredictable. She dove the last 5 feet, sliding into cover beside a dazed and bleeding Colonel Madsen. Who the hell are you?" he stammered, looking from her to the now silent northern ridge. "Someone who's getting us out of here," she replied, her hands already flying over the comms unit inside the MRAP's open door. The main radio was destroyed, fragments of metal embedded in its casing. But the SATCOM unit, a hardened auxiliary system, seemed intact, though its power line had been severed. "Jamming is too strong," Madsen grunted, fumbling with his own radio. "Can't get a signal." "They're not just jamming," Sharma said, her fingers tracing wires inside the MRAP's comms panel. "They're using a frequency hopper. Standard comms are useless. We need to bypass it." She pulled a multi-tool from another of her non-standard pouches. With the skill of a master technician, she began stripping wires, splicing a direct connection from the vehicle's battery to the SATCOM unit. Sparks flew. The machine gun on the southern ridge roared back to life, pinning them down. Thorne screamed as a round ricocheted, sending a shard of rock into his good leg. "I need 5 minutes," Sharma said, her voice tight with concentration. "We don't have 5 minutes," Madsen yelled back, firing his sidearm uselessly at the cliffs. Sharma looked at him, then at the rifle in her hands. She looked at the pinned-down, wounded soldiers. She looked at the relentless enemy fire. Then she made a decision. She couldn't fight them and fix the radio at the same time, but she could make them stop shooting. She crawled to the front of the MRAP, peering around the massive engine block. The southern HMG nest was perfectly placed, tucked into a small cave-like opening in the rock face, about 500 meters away. It was almost impossible to hit with direct fire. Almost. She remembered the cargo, the experimental EW components, stored in hardened Pelican cases. But there was something else on the manifest, tucked away in a crate at the back of her vehicle. Thermobaric grenades. Highly regulated, meant for clearing bunkers, and definitely not on the standard loadout for an infantry convoy. She knew because she had signed for them. "Harris!" she yelled. "In my truck, back left corner." A green crate marked, "Special Ordnance." "Bring it." Harris looked at her, then at the storm of bullets impacting all around them, and hesitated. "Now!" The command in her voice was absolute, forged in crucibles he couldn't possibly imagine. He scrambled into the MRAP. A moment later he emerged, dragging the heavy green crate. Sharma was already rigging a simple but ingenious system. She took a length of comms wire from the damaged radio, tied it to the pin of one of the grenades, and looped the other end around a piece of jagged metal on the MRAP. She set the rifle on the ground, aimed carefully at the small opening in the cliff face. "What are you doing?" Matson asked, his voice weak. "Creating a diversion," she said. She took a deep breath, judged the distance and the wind. Then, in one smooth, continuous motion, she pulled the grenade, yanked the pin with the preset wire, and underhanded the explosive with a perfect, gentle arc. At the same time, she fired the rifle. The bullet wasn't aimed at the gunner. It was aimed at the rock just above the opening of their nest. The grenade sailed through the air, a small, dark speck against the sky. The enemy soldiers, distracted for a split second by the bullet's impact, didn't see it coming. The grenade landed on the ledge just in front of their position and rolled inside. The explosion was not a sharp crack. It was a deep, guttural hump that seemed to suck the very air out of the canyon. A ball of incandescent gas erupted from the cave opening, followed by a roiling cloud of black smoke. The heavy machine gun fire ceased instantly. A profound, ringing silence fell over the gulch, broken only by the crackle of the burning trucks and the moans of the wounded. Every surviving soldier stared at the smoking hole in the cliff. They looked at Sharma, who was already back at the radio, her face illuminated by the green glow of the now-powered screen. She hadn't even watched her own handiwork. She quickly tapped a sequence into the keypad, initiating a secure, encrypted burst transmission on a restricted SOCOM frequency. It was a digital shriek that would cut through any jamming. She put the handset to her ear. Static hissed. "Any station, this is, call sign. Wanderer 4, she said, using the convoy's designation. We are under attack in Grid Square. 7-9er Echo. Vulture's Gulch. Hostiles are sophisticated. Request immediate QRF and air support. How copy?" The static continued for a long, agonizing moment. Matson watched her, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. Thorne, propped up against a rock, stared at her with wide, pain-filled eyes. The woman they had mocked, the accountant they had despised, had just single-handedly dismantled a complex ambush and saved all their lives. A voice, distorted and faint, finally broke through the hiss. "Station, identify, your authentication is non-standard. For Wanderer 4-inch. Sharma paused. She knew standard protocols wouldn't work. She had to give them something they would recognize. Something from a world far beyond the 107th Infantry. She keyed the mic again. "RogueNet authentication," she said, her voice low and clear. "Code word, Blackenville. Priority, Scimitar." There was a dead silence on the other end. The operator at command would be reeling. Those were Tier 1 codes reserved for the most elite, most secret units in the entire military. A ghost protocol. The voice that came back was different, sharper, more urgent. All trace of skepticism was gone. "Stand by. We are verifying." Another pause, this one electric with tension. Then, the voice returned, filled with a sense of utter reverence. "Authentication confirmed. My God, we have you now." Signal is faint. There was a shuffling sound, and a new, deeper voice came on the line. "This is Task Force Command. We're tracking your signal burst. Who is this? Identify yourself." Sharma looked at the wounded soldiers around her, at the burning trucks, at the silent, smoking cliffs. Her life as a quiet logistics analyst was over. She keyed the mic one last time. "This is Chief Warrant Officer Sharma." She took a breath. "My call sign is Callie. I say again, call sign Callie. And I am painting the target for you." The name hung in the air, a word of impossible weight. In the command center miles away, a stunned silence would have fallen. On the radio, the deep voice simply said, "Copy that, Callie. Air support is inbound." ETA 4 minutes. Hold fast. Colonel Madsen's head snapped up. His eyes, wide with shock, locked onto Sharma. Callie. It wasn't just a call sign. It was a legend. A ghost story whispered in classified briefings and late-night sessions at the bar in Langley and Bragg. Callie was the code name for a phantom, a female operator attached to DevGru, spoken of only in hushed, reverent tones. An operative credited with dozens of high-stakes missions, from hostage rescues to direct action against high-value targets. A name synonymous with impossible precision and lethality. A name that hadn't been heard in years, rumored to be retired or dead. Thorne, his face smeared with dirt and his own blood, heard it too. The name seemed to physically shock him, snapping him out of his pain-induced haze. His jaw went slack. The sneering arrogance that had defined him was stripped away, replaced by a raw, uncomprehending awe. He looked at Sharma, at this small, quiet woman, and he didn't see an accountant anymore. He saw the architect of his survival. He saw the reason the world had stopped exploding. He saw a goddess of destruction from the stories his instructors used to tell to scare new recruits. The shift was instantaneous and total. It was a chemical reaction in the thin, dusty air of the gulch. The remaining soldiers, Harris, the corporal from the command truck, the wounded survivors from the lead vehicle, all stared at her. The mockery, the dismissal, the hatred. It all evaporated, burned away by the heat of her actions and the impossible weight of that single word. They were no longer looking at a fellow soldier. They were looking at something else entirely, something far beyond their comprehension. Sharma paid their stunned expressions no mind. The mission wasn't over. Survival was only the first step. "Right?" she said, her voice sharp, pulling them all back to the brutal reality of the moment. "They're suppressed, not eliminated. They'll regroup. We fortify this position now." Her words, which minutes ago would have been ignored, now carried the force of a thunderclap. Thorne, despite his shattered leg, immediately began trying to organize the other wounded. "You heard her. Get to cover. Consolidate ammo." Harris and the corporal moved without hesitation, their fear replaced by a desperate, focused energy. They saw her not just as a leader, but as their only hope. They followed her orders with the reflexive obedience of men who have just witnessed a miracle. Sharma moved among them, a whirlwind of calm, controlled purpose. Her hands were never still. She directed the placement of the survivors, creating a tight, 360-degree defensive perimeter around the two central MRAPs. She redistributed ammunition from the dead and wounded, ensuring every able-bodied man had a full combat load. Her medical skills were as terrifyingly efficient as her marksmanship. She moved from one wounded soldier to the next, applying tourniquets, packing wounds, and administering morphine with a practiced, almost detached, grace. She triaged with brutal, necessary logic. Those who could be saved, she saved. Those whose injuries were too severe, she made comfortable. There was no sentimentality, only function. She reached Thorne last. He was propped against a wheel, having fashioned a makeshift splint for his leg from a piece of twisted metal and his own belt. He looked up at her as she knelt beside him, his eyes filled with a turmoil of pain, shame, and awe. "Legs broken in 2 places," he grunted, the words catching in his throat. "Femur, I think." Sharma's hands moved over the injury, her touch firm and diagnostic. "It's a clean break. You'll keep the leg." She pulled a syringe of morphine from her kit. "This will help with the pain." He flinched as she administered the shot, but his eyes never left her face. I'm sorry," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "What we said. What I did." Sharma paused, her gaze meeting his. For the first time, he saw a flicker of something beyond the cold, professional calm. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something harder, more profound. It was the look of someone who had seen so much of the world's ugliness that his petty cruelty didn't even register. "Focus on staying alive, Sergeant," she said, her voice neutral. "That's all that matters right now." She moved on before he could say another word. The distant, Rhythmic whump, whump, whump of helicopter blades began to echo through the canyon. The sound grew steadily louder, a promise of salvation. "That's them," Madsen said from his position, his voice raspy. He was looking at Sharma, his face a mask of profound respect. The rigid hierarchy of command, the lines between a colonel and a warrant officer, had dissolved. In this crucible, there was only one person in charge. "They'll be looking for a landing zone," Sharma stated, scanning the gulch. "The road is blocked. They'll have to drop ropes." She looked up at the sky. "Get your IR strobes ready. Pop them on my mark." The two Apache gunships appeared first, cresting the southern ridge like angry insects. They swept through the gulch, cannons and rockets blazing, strafing the cliff faces where the ambushers had been hidden. Secondary explosions blossomed on the rocks as they obliterated any remaining resistance. Then came the Black Hawks, two of them hovering over the kill zone, their rotors kicking up a blinding storm of dust and debris. Ropes snaked down from their open doors. "Pop strobes," Sharma commanded. The flashing infrared lights cut through the dust cloud, guiding the pararescuemen, the PJs, who rappelled down with practiced ease. They hit the ground and immediately began setting up triage stations, their movements mirroring Sharma's own efficiency. The PJ team leader, a master sergeant with a heavily scarred face, jogged over to the command MRAP. He saw Colonel Madsen, then his eyes found Sharma, who was directing the other survivors to move the wounded toward the ropes. "Who's in command here?" the PJ asked, his voice muffled by the rotor wash. Madsen, despite his injury, pushed himself up slightly. He didn't point to himself. He simply nodded toward Sharma. "She is." The master sergeant looked at Sharma, his experienced eyes taking in her calm demeanor, the non-standard gear on her vest, the way she moved with an economy that screamed special operations. He saw the devastation around them, and the small, disciplined group of survivors she had forged from the chaos. He didn't need to be told her call sign. He could see it. He gave her a short, sharp nod of professional recognition, a sign of respect from one elite warrior to another. The evacuation was swift and efficient. The wounded were hoisted up first, Thorne and Madsen among them. Before he was lifted into the sky, Madsen locked eyes with Sharma one last time. He didn't speak. He simply raised his good hand in a slow, deliberate salute. It wasn't the perfunctory gesture of a superior officer. It was a tribute, a concession of deference from a man who had commanded battalions to the quiet woman who had commanded a battlefield. Sharma watched until the last soldier was safely in the air. Only then did she allow herself to be hooked onto a rope. As she ascended, rising above the wreckage and the bodies, she looked down at the scene of the battle. It was just another valley of death, another scar on the earth, another entry in a long, bloody ledger. She felt no triumph, no relief, only the quiet, weary weight of a job that was, for the moment, done. Days bled into a week. Back at FOB Erebus, the silence surrounding Chief Warrant Officer Anya Sharma was of a different kind now. It was no longer the silence of dismissal, but of reverence. The story of Vulture's Gulch had spread through the base like wildfire, whispered in the chow hall and the maintenance bays. The details were embellished, as such stories always are, but the core truth remained. The quiet logistics chief was a legend. The name Callie was spoken only in hushed, awe-filled tones. Soldiers from the 107th parted for her when she walked by. They avoided her gaze, not out of contempt, but out of a mixture of fear and respect. They were looking at a living ghost, a figure from a world they could barely comprehend. Thorne and the other wounded had been airlifted to a hospital in Germany, but their accounts had been relayed back, cementing her status. Sharma, for her part, seemed unchanged. She resumed her duties, auditing supply manifests and tracking cargo shipments with the same quiet, methodical focus as before. She filed her after-action report, a document so concise and devoid of emotion that it read more like an engineering schematic than a description of a bloody ambush. She requested no commendation, accepted no praise. She simply went back to work. The contrast between her mundane duties and her known capabilities was a source of constant, unnerving cognitive dissonance for everyone on the base. The new command staff, flown in to replace Madsen and his team, treated her with a formal, almost fearful deference. They gave her a wide berth, understanding that she was not truly part of their chain of command. She was something else, operating under a different set of rules, temporarily embedded in their world. They knew better than to ask questions. The closure, when it came, was as quiet and unspoken as everything else about her. It happened late one night, under the harsh, buzzing glare of the motor pool floodlights. The air was cool, and the red dust had settled, coating every surface in a fine film. Sharma was not in her quarters or in the TOC. She was standing in front of a newly arrived MRAP, the replacement for one of the vehicles lost in the ambush. Its engine housing was open, the complex machinery gleaming under the lights. She was not cleaning a weapon or engaging in any of the stereotypical activities of a warrior. She was performing maintenance. In her hands was a torque wrench, and she was systematically checking the tension on the engine mount bolts. It was a simple, necessary task, a logistician's task. It was her job. She was dressed in simple fatigues, her hair tied back, her face smudged with grease. In that moment, she was once again the anonymous analyst she had tried to be. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. She didn't turn, but her body tensed ever so slightly, a predator's subtle awareness of its surroundings. It was Corporal Diaz. He was one of the survivors of the ambush, having escaped with only minor injuries. He had been one of Thorne's staunchest allies in mocking her. He stood several feet away, shifting his weight, clearly uncomfortable. He held something in his hand. Sharma continued her work, tightening a bolt with a precise click of the wrench. "Chief," Diaz said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. Sharma stopped, but still did not turn. "Corporal, we." The guys wanted to say. He trailed off, the words failing him. An apology felt insultingly inadequate. Gratitude felt too small. He looked down at the object in his hand. It was a specialized socket extension, a tool for reaching a particularly inaccessible bolt deep in the engine block. He had seen her struggling to reach it earlier in the day. He took a step forward and held it out. "You need this," he said. It was all he could manage. Sharma finally turned. She looked at the tool, then at his face. His eyes were filled with an earnest, profound respect. He wasn't just handing her a piece of equipment. It was an offering, a tribute, a recognition of her true nature, the master of systems, whether they be supply chains or battlefields. He understood, in that moment, that her meticulous attention to the engine was the same focused discipline she had used to dismantle the ambush. It was all part of the same whole. She reached out and took the tool from his hand. Her grease-stained fingers brushed against his. "Thank you, Corporal," she said, her voice even. Diaz just nodded, then backed away slowly, as if leaving the presence of something sacred. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone once more under the lights. Sharma turned back to the engine. She fitted the new extension to her wrench and slid it deep into the vehicle's guts, easily reaching the bolt that had been inaccessible before. With a smooth, practiced motion, she tightened it to the correct specification. Click. She worked for hours, alone in the vast, silent motor pool. She moved with an unhurried rhythm, her focus absolute. The rest of the base slept, but she found a strange peace in the tangible reality of the work, in the order she could impose on this small piece of the world. As the first hint of dawn began to soften the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and pale gray, she finally finished. She closed the engine housing, wiped her hands on a rag, and stood back, surveying her work. The vehicle was ready. The task was complete. She stood there for a long time, a solitary figure in the growing light, watching the sun rise over the distant, hostile hills. The war would go on. There would be other convoys, other ambushes. But here, in this quiet moment, there was a sense of balance. Respect had been earned not with words or status, but with grease and blood, with competence and cold, hard action. And for a silent warrior like Callie, That was the only kind of respect that ever truly mattered.